from office to office before they go into certain meetings. Everybody's having their temperature taken. In short, they have safeguards that no other business in America would have. And yet it's even a frightening experience, they say, to go to work at the White House. How does this complicate the president's efforts to try to reopen the government before so many of these states fail to even meet his own White House guidelines?
That's exactly the right framing here. First of all, this shows the incredible reach of this virus, that it has penetrated the West Wing, which has more robust, more active testing than any other place in the country by a large margin. This is now, we had the valet for the president last week was the first to get it. We know that the vice president's press secretary now is tested positive. Her husband, Stephen Miller, is isolating for that reason. We know that reportedly that she was coughing a little bit in meetings last week, drawing some looks from other advisors. We saw the photo there of her talking to the press, reporters there, without wearing a mask. And it's a tone that's set from the top. We reported last week in the Associated Press about how President Trump refuses to wear one in public, that he's concerned it sends the wrong message, that it sends the idea that he's too focused on the public health crisis or his own health rather than restarting the economy, rather than reopening the nation, which is what his advisors believe he needs to do to try to win re-election. We also reported, of course, that he has told people around him he doesn't like how he looks in a mask, and that he's afraid it would end up in a negative campaign ad. And when that tone is set from the top and then other supervisors in the White House follow that model, then staffers, yes, they are going to feel pressure to keep coming into work. They're going to feel pressure to not wear a mask when they're in there. And now we're seeing real concern among those working in the West Wing about the virus. And as you say, we all remember the TV show The West Wing with these long walk and talks down these hallways. The West Wing's a pretty small place. There aren't many spots to go where you can be distant from other people. You can have that necessary 6 feet. Yes, there are temperature checks. Yes, people are being tested all the time. But clearly the virus has spread. And it really complicates the president's mission here. His relentless tone to say it is time for America to go back to work. He's trying to downplay the public health risk, even though we've gone to 80,000 deaths and that's still climbing. The infection rate is rising throughout most of the country. He's saying it's safe. We should go back to work, be it in his own office, in his own home. We are seeing positive cases.
This is absolutely nuts. There's now scrutiny surrounding what's being done to keep the virus away from the president. Several security officials with executive branch experience said in interviews on Friday that the White House has taken a lax and risky approach that, in their view, reflected Trump's consistent efforts to minimize the threat from the virus. He and his top aides don't wear masks, and the president doesn't practice social distancing as he continues to huddle for photo ops. We saw that again with first responders that he brought into the White House and forced them into a position where they did not practice what they need to practice to stay alive. What everybody needs to practice, Joe, to stay alive.
Well, again, the president's worried about the optics. The pandemic doesn't care about the optics. Tom Nichols, the president, also, you talk about the death of expertise. This is just the celebration of stupidity when the president of the United States talks about the vice president's press person getting COVID-19 and then saying, see, I told you tests don't matter. Even with all these tests, she still got it. I mean, one of the stupidest things I've ever heard, because, of course, if they weren't taking tests inside the White House, we would probably find out next week that, well, probably a huge number of people inside the White House got it. Instead, there was testing, obviously tracing, isolation, treatment, the sort of things that Dr. Fauci says we want to have nationwide, but we don't because of Donald Trump's failures. But now the president himself somehow talking about this strict regimen inside the White House that found somebody immediately and sent them home, this strict regimen inside the White House somehow being a failure and proving that we don't need testing nationwide. Explain that for me, if you will.
I wish I could. This isn't the death of expertise. This is like the murder of expertise every day, over and over. My favorite part of the president's comment on the new case in the White House, he said, oh, she tested negative, and then for some reason she tested positive, as though, it's a mystery. Gosh, she was negative, and then for some reason, well, of course, for some reason, she contracted the virus. That's what happens when people are close together, when social distancing isn't observed, when masks aren't worn, when you don't wipe things down. As Jonathan Lemire said, it's tight quarters in there, but also it's people handing each other things all day, papers, and working at workstations and sitting at tables. I mean, it's a tough place, any kind of workplace. That's why we've all been sent home. But it shows you again that not only, the problem with expertise is obvious, because expertise always conflicts with what the president wants, and the president tries to make his own reality. In some sense, the president now is dealing with the pandemic the way little children deal with hide and seek, where if they cover their eyes and they can't see you, they think you can't see them. And that's what the president's doing. If I just pretend it's not there, and I just act like it's not an issue, then it goes away. Because if I don't wear a mask, then nobody has to wear a mask, because then the virus doesn't exist. I mean, this is really childlike, magical thinking, while we're basically having the equivalent of a 9/11 every few days.
Well, it is magical thinking, and again, to the Republicans in the Senate, I wonder, Republicans in the Senate and the House.
Where are you?
Where are you? Why won't you talk to the president forcefully? This is a public health crisis. Yeah, we're not talking about Robert Mueller.
Yeah.
If you're fine with obstruction of justice from a president,
good on you.
Good on you. You will pay for it at the polls. You already have in 18. You'll pay at the polls in 20 as well. That's fine. If you're fine with what the president did with the Ukraine call, good on you. You're the one that's going to pay at the polls in 20, just like so many Republicans paid it. But we're talking in this case, this is a pandemic. This is the worst health care crisis in a century. This is the worst national crisis we've faced since World War II. And you're sitting on your hands while the President of the United States continues to act recklessly. From the beginning, as you know, in January, he said it was just one person coming in from China. It was going to be fine. In February, into February, he said it was just 15 people. It was going to be down to 0. They did a great job. Mm-hmm. Remember, Republican senators, he told you in March, there's nothing to worry about. Just stay calm. It's going to go away. Remember the magical thinking when he told you that it was going to magically go away in April? Ended up more people died of this virus that the president said was magically going to go away in April. More people died in April of the coronavirus than died during the entire Vietnam War. His magical thinking continued with drugs that now we find out are unsafe. He was shoving those drugs on the American people, shoving those drugs on people in his own administration, shoving those drugs on patients at the VA system. The magical thinking continued with injecting disinfectants into bodies and trying to get his doctors to seriously look at that, as well as shoving lights inside of people. I mean, this Republicans, this is not right. You know he's not well.
People are dying.
You know that the death count is now over 80,000. It's going to keep going higher. And you know that both he and all of his supporters in those crowds way back in February, and a lot of his supporters on TV in March, were still calling this the latest hoax the press was making up to bring down the president of the United States. That it wasn't really that bad, that they were just drumming it up. But Rev, you have Republican members of the Senate who are responsible for the safety of people inside their state, along with the governors, along with the mayor. You have Republican House members in the same position, and yet they're not speaking out. They're not even quietly going to the White House, telling the president enough is enough. Don't tweet about Brian Stelter on a weekend.
Come on, man.
That we crossed the 80,000 threshold. That's like FDR in World War II or after Pearl Harbor. Is he going to tweet about a media critic at the Cleveland Plain Dealer?